So let's talk about sex. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 6. This is Paul writing to a pagan culture, and you could not believe the stuff that was going on. And here's what he says. He's using a literary device called diatribe. Diatribe's where he's giving the opponent's point of view, and then he's going to answer it, right? He says, I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything's beneficial. In other words, exalting your personal freedom over things like wisdom, the common good, what is wise, what is useful, what is helpful to the whole. If everybody was doing that, the world would be a horrible place. I have a right to do anything, you say, but not everything's beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. You say, food for the stomach and the stomach for food. God will destroy them both, which is a weird sentence unless you understand that in first century Corinth, that's how you hired a prostitute. That sentence was how you would hire a prostitute. And keep in mind, in the first century, prostitution was not voluntary. Underclassed people were forced to serve in those capacities, sometimes in public acts of worship in temples like the Temple of Belial, and they were forced into that because they were lower class. And the way that was justified was the statement, food for the stomach for food, God will destroy them both. In other words, we're all gonna die at some point, I may as well get my basic needs met by you, okay? So it was a way to hire a prostitute. The body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power, God raised the Lord from the dead, and he'll raise us also. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Shall I then take the members of Christ and then unite them with a prostitute? Never, and I want to be clear about this. He's not coming against the prostitute. He's coming against the idea that it's okay to objectify another person in this way. Okay? Like he's not going dirty prostitute, right? Do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said the two will become one flesh, but whoever's united with the Lord is one with him in spirit. Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually, that sin is against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own, you're bought with a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. Let's see where this takes us. Just for full disclosure, I do have a master's degree in clinical psychology in the area of sex and sexuality. I also have 2 degrees in theology, and I'm gonna try to not make both reconcile, but to bring the wisdom of clinical psychology and scientific truth in with some biblical truth and some theological truth and hopefully some Christ-like nature. We all realize that the goal of Christianity is not to be biblical. The goal of Christianity is to be Christ-like. The Bible is not the final authority. How Jesus applied the Bible is the final authority. That's why none of you killed a goat this morning. That's why none of you poured out half in of water, quarter in of wine. That's why none of you are wearing tassels on the corners of your garments right now. That's why most of you are not ashamed to shave the side of your face. And nobody in this room is aware of the fact that it's a sin to wear a shirt of mixed cloth. Because the goal of Christianity is not to be biblical. The goal of Christianity is to be Christ-like. How Jesus applied the Bible is our ultimate goal. That's our highest ethic. It's called Christianity. Now, initial thought on this. Now, so we're gonna mix some clinical stuff, we're gonna mix some theology stuff, we're gonna mix some Christ-like stuff, and hopefully some humor, so please do laugh at the jokes. Although I can feel the nervousness in the room. You know, this is not easy to be up here, so make it easier on me, right? This topic. And before anybody criticizes me after this, if you would rather be the one up here, I'll gladly stand down and let you try to handle this, all right? So, initial thought, the when and the who of sex is far less important than the why and the what. And that's been problematic, is for a long, long time, the church has focused almost entirely on when is it okay and who is it okay with almost no education on why and what it even is. And if we focus a bit more on the why and the what, the when and the who will take care of itself, right? So the when and the who is far less important than the why and the what. So a quick observation about this, next slide. So let's name some words that we associate with healthy spirituality. So words associated with healthy spirituality, they words like wholeness, sacred, committed, relationship, safety, trust, communion, connectedness, joy. Those, and we could add some more, but those are, in general, those are words associated with someone who is experiencing a healthy spirituality. Now, next slide, I want us to name words associated with a healthy sexuality. And I would make a case that a healthy sexuality is not found in erotica. A healthy sexuality is actually the same words. Like if you're experiencing a healthy sexuality between you and your spouse, you wouldn't actually describe the healthiness of your sex life with the actual sex act. That would be weird. With just our bodies. No, actually, couples who have the best sex lives are the ones that don't depend on it to make their relationship okay. Right? It's like, wait a minute, it's like good sex is important, and I'm certainly not demeaning it, but what makes good sex is not the quality of the sex act. It's actually good. What makes good sex is that the good sex is the cherry on top of a big giant cake of love and support and communion and wholeness and compassion and supportiveness and lack of volatility. And it's all of that. See, spirituality and sexuality cannot be disconnected. Now, before we go further, I want to apologize for a lot of things, okay? So before we go further, I want to say I'm sorry for a few things. First, I'm sorry for the wounds in this room. That's why you could feel the defense, like sex has wounds attached to it. And if you've been wounded sexually, I'm really sorry for whatever experience you had there. I'm sorry for any abuse. It is almost impossible in a room this size that there's not an abuse victim here. And if that's you, and so if you listen to what I'm fixing to say and you go, Shane, if you knew my story, you would understand why I just can't accept that. I want to give you all the space in the world to journey at your pace, because your wholeness with God is far more important than whatever I'm going to say about sex. I'm sorry for broken promises. I'm sorry for people who broke trust. I'm sorry for the shaming that's been involved in sex. I'm sorry especially for the images that purity culture gave us. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you're under 25, you don't really know what that is, because toxic purity culture doesn't exist here at New Hope. But if you're 37 to 53, you know what I'm talking about. Purity culture was an equal but opposite reaction to the absolute debauchery of the baby boomers. By far, the most promiscuous generation in the last 100 years were the people born between 1944 and 1960. It's not even close. According to the biggest study around this ever done by the University of Washington, they said that the generation born in the 40s had 3.5 times more sex partners before marriage than the generation turning 30 today does. And here's the caveat, they got married at 19. Generation today gets married at 30. I couldn't believe it. So I went to my dad, who was born in 1946. I was like, Dad, I don't want to know the details, bro. I just want to know if you agree, disagree, or neutral. And he goes, I want to make sure you're not tricking me. Does that thing say that I had more sex or less sex than my grandchildren? I said, Dad, unthinkable more. Like hard to imagine how you had the time more. I can't believe how much just gratuitous bonking your generation did according to this study. And Dad was like, so it's saying I had more? I said, Dad, lots more. He went, for sure, absolutely. He said, I was 17 in 1963, bro. If somebody was willing and held still, you just did it. So when I hear somebody in their mid-70s going, oh, this generation these days, what, you got amnesia? We got pictures. Now, of course, you didn't post it on the internet. So what happened is that generation in the 70s and 80s started having children, and then by the mid to late 80s, those children were teenagers. And that generation, that Woodstock generation went, oh no! And they started purporting something that became purity culture. In purity culture, the message was correct. The images were spoiled, and that's the problem. Here, it made it sound like if you mess up once, you're ruined for life. And that is not the gospel in any way, shape, form, or fashion. But they certainly communicated it that way. And if you're like, Shane, I think you're exaggerating. No, I'm not. I saw a youth pastor take a mannequin with a white wedding dress and then take a thing and fling mud at it. And the mud stuck to the white wedding dress. And he said, that's what you'll look like on your wedding night if you're not a virgin. That is nonsensical. And almost 100% of the onus on purity was on the girl. And that's not okay either, right? I heard some of the stupidest things you've ever heard when I was a teenager around this. Like, these are real things, like the white wedding dress with the mud. I heard things like this, you know, your virginity is like a diamond. And if you scuff it, you can never unscuff it. It's like, what? Or they took a bottle of water and they took a dropper of ink and they're like, it's just 2 mistakes. They put 2 drops of ink in the water and then they'd shake it up and go, would you drink that? You know? Or the worst, well, I don't know, those are pretty bad. But one of the stupidest for sure is the greatest, hey, you girls, the greatest gift you could give your future spouse is your virginity. I can think of 50 greater gifts. Like, are you serious? Hey, I don't bathe, but I'm a virgin. Here's your prize. I'm critical, cantankerous, jealous, possessive, and quite frankly horrible. You're gonna regret the day you were ever born because of me, but I'm a virgin. You're welcome. Like, how dumb? And if purity culture, let me say it this way, if you gave up on sexual integrity because you felt ruined because of the images of purity, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Because the gospel is renewable. The gospel is new creation. And I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry for anyone who has experienced the pain of being objectified, if that's been your story. I'm sorry for the lie that marriage guarantees a healthy sexuality. It absolutely does not. And there's a reason. We're going to talk about that. All right, so let's define sex, because again, words don't matter. How we picture words working matters. So if all we think about of sex is the physical act of it, we're gonna miss a big point. That's what gets us focused on the who and the when instead of the why and the what. So here's a good definition, next slide. The word sex comes from the Latin word secare, which means to sever, amputate, disconnect from the whole. We get words like sect, section, dissect, bisect from this word. So number 2, next slide, sex has 2 dimensions. First, it is our awareness of disconnection. And then second, it's all the ways we go about trying to reconnect. So sex isn't just the act. If sex is just the sex act, then it gets very easy to rationalize very unhealthy actions because it's just my body. But no, sex goes way. Can you imagine telling a Holocaust survivor, oh, it was just your body? No, it actually goes into an awareness of disconnection and then all the ways we try to connect. This is why we'll talk about this in a little bit. This is why the most overtly erotic places are also the most unsexual places. Because there's a big difference between erotic and sexual. We'll talk about that in a second. So for today, next slide, let's say it this way. For today, I'm using the word sexuality to talk about a healthy practice and how we engage another from my identity in Christ. And for today, I'm using the word genitality to talk about unhealthy practice of how we engage another for my identity. So healthy sexuality, we engage the other from our identity, and unhealthy sexuality, we're engaging the other person for my identity. And that creates different dynamics. Now, as I thought about how could I talk about this in one talk, I think instead of asking, like there's some dumb questions I've heard about sex. Like I've heard dumb things anyway, but like some of the dumb things are, is it right or wrong? Can I still go to heaven when I die if I do it? How far can I go before God's mad? Well, these are dumb questions. And I think it's a distraction from actually the thing underneath the thing, that if we just handle that, those questions actually come to light anyway. I think there's 6 tensions and 3 narratives, okay? So 6 tensions and 3 narratives. Here are the 6 tensions. 1, next slide, image bearer or object. All right, so here's the gospel, all the way from Genesis 1, and this is what changed the world, that every human being on the earth, whether they know it or not, is held together by God, was made for God, for by him and through him and for him, all things were created, and in him all things hold together. In Genesis 1, one of the most revolutionary poems ever written, it claimed that both male and female were made in the image of God. An unthinkable thought when that was written. When that was written, the word image of God was limited only to kings. What Genesis claimed is that, no, it's not just the elite that have the image of God. It's everybody, everywhere, male and female. It's a holy, sacred awareness that God is in each individual person. And when an image bearer becomes an object, that's a problem. When she becomes a that's a problem. So instead of is it right or wrong, I think here's a better question. Does my behavior, I'm not talking about mistakes, I'm talking about, does my behavior, if continued into perpetuity, does it honor the image bearer in each person, or does it objectify them in any way? That's a much better question. It's particularly around things like pornography. Like we would say, well, it's just a computer and it's an actor, it's consent. Hold on. But one of the issues with pornography is that it teaches us to objectify an image bearer. So a she becomes a that, and that is a problem because that leaks. Once we learn to objectify somebody in one area, it's very hard not to objectify people in other areas. So if we learn to objectify people here, it's not just sex, it's we learn to objectify the waiter, the waitress, the cashier in the Woolworths line. We learn to objectify our neighbor. We learn to objectify the driver in the other lane. We learn to use people to make our goals and needs met instead of honoring the image bearer in them. So one tension is image bearer object. The second tension is acceptance versus affirmation. When I get asked about sex, when I get asked about it, I think every day of my life. But when I get asked about it, one of the tensions I think we need to develop is it's a gift, it's a grace. And that is this, to be able to accept a person without having to affirm everything about that person. And we don't frankly find that very difficult with any other topic. Like, I fully accept all of you. But if I knew everything about all of you, there'd be something I wouldn't affirm. Whether it's what you eat or what you drink or your fitness level or how you drive or how you speak to your husband or how you speak to your wife, we don't have to affirm everything in order to accept a person. And that's something God showed us from the beginning, this incredible ability to accept someone without affirming everything about that someone. We need to develop that. The third tension is acceptance versus understanding. Those are 2 different things. If you remove understanding from acceptance, it taints the acceptance. Like if you don't understand what I mean, if you and your wife have been having a discussion for the last 3 days and you're not really seeing eye to eye on this. And so what you do is tonight, just look at her in the eye and say, sweetie, I'm really tired of having this discussion. I want you to know I accept whatever you're saying, but I still don't understand a word coming out of your mouth. As soon as you remove the understanding from the acceptance, you're gonna have a bigger talk, right? And that's part of the issue. This isn't just about sex. This is how we stay disconnected from our world. This is one of the issues with racism in America, okay? I'm sure there's racism here. I just don't know enough about it to speak to it. I can speak to racism in America because I'm from there. One of the issues with racism in America are not overt racist, although they're certainly there. One of the issues with racism in America were people like me. People who are not racist, but I had not taken the time to understand the story of the African American, right? And so I was challenged on that by a good friend of mine, an African American friend. And I spent a couple years understanding the narratives, understanding the story, understanding what it was like to be black in Alabama, understanding that. And when you understand the story, it makes the acceptance matter more. I accepted people of color all along, but I had not taken the time to fully understand what it was like to be in that situation. And so a healthy sexuality doesn't just accept, it actually takes the time to understand. Which, by the way, as an aside note, that's the whole point of the incarnation. God could have just accepted human beings because he's God. He could do anything he wants. But the incarnation showed us that acceptance was not the entire goal. He wanted to understand. And how do you understand? You engage their story by becoming it. It's that, so that no person could ever stand before God and go, well, he didn't get me. Let's say it. A fourth tension is the sacred versus the profane. The sacred versus the profane. Your sexuality is sacred. Like if you're married, there are certain things that only belong between you and your spouse, right? The Jews have this great analogy called the huppah. So a huppah, if you don't know what it is, it's a wedding altar. In the earliest days, it was just a prayer shawl spread out above people. Now, as people had more money, huppahs became more and more and more elaborate, right? But the idea is that under the huppah is a sacred space. It only belongs between you and them. And if you violate it, even if you this is why, and I want to be fair, men are far more guilty about this than women. Men oftentimes overshare details that the wife thought was private. And if they're confronted on that, they're like, what? It's true. It's like, yeah, it's true, but they all didn't need to know that I passed gas at dinner. And you've just embarrassed me. Like what I thought was between you and me, you've now made it in front of everybody. And it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of you took something that was in the sacred trust and you profaned it by making it public. And so a lot of times the problem we have with expressions of sexuality is not whether it's right or wrong. It's when somebody takes something that's private and personal and sacred and is best expressed between two people and you put it out in public or you flaunt it. This is why we've all had this experience, right? Have you ever seen a couple being a little bit too publicly affectionate in an airport or something, right? And what's the line? Get a room, right? Now, would there be anything wrong? So there's a married couple of 8 years that are saying goodbye at the airport. Is there anything wrong with passionately kissing? No, it's just disgusting. And no one wants to see that. Right? There's a public expression of affection that's appropriate. And then there are certain expressions of affection in public that are far best left in the sacred space. And if you don't leave it there, in some instances, it's illegal, right? That's a tension we have to deal with. Number 5 tension is creation versus anti-creation. What I mean, and I don't mean procreation, I mean this. Creation works one way. Creation goes from disorder to order, from chaos to new creation. And all of our behaviors, including our sexuality, all of our behavior is either driving our life towards new creation and greater order, or it's driving us towards more disorder and confusion and chaos. And so the question is, it's less, is it right or wrong? That's a cheap way to ask it. The much better question is my sexuality, if expressed the way I'm doing it, if I continue that on into perpetuity, does it lead me towards the creation and new creation narrative, or does it lead me toward the disorder and chaos narrative? It's that. That's a tension that we should have to deal with. 6th tension is personal freedom for the sake of my rights, or humility for the sake of the whole. And actually, if everybody, to Paul's point, if everybody just said, I have a right to do anything, it's my body, I can do what I want, fine. But if everybody lived that way, the world would be a pretty awful place. For the world to be a better place requires something else, selflessness and joy. Here is a quote by Ronald Rolheiser in his book, Sacred Fire. Next slide. A healthy sexuality is the single most powerful vehicle there is to lead us to selflessness and joy, because it's not just about sex. It's about preferring the other. Now, a couple things, next slide. The idea that people can't control their sexuality is not the voice of reason. It's like, I just can't. And that's the voice in Corinth is, I can't control myself. Food for the stomach for food, man. One way or the other, this is happening, right? That's not the voice of realism. It's the voice of despair. Like, aren't we just doomed to food for the stomach and stomach for food? The question underneath the question is, are we different from animals? Like, seriously, is there not a higher order of things for image bearers instead of objects, for image bearers instead of animals? Or let's say it this way, next slide. Are we moving towards greater chaos or greater order? Are we just telling people to ignore their sexuality, asking them to be sexual anorexics? Like the clinical side of me, like sexual issues mirror food issues. I know, strange, but it's true. Like, so food or eating disorders, there are anorexics. Anorexics are people who, it's way more complicated than this, but they ignore their need for food and pretend like it's not there. They're better off without it, and it ends up killing them, right? So there's anorexics. On the other side, there's gluttons. Gluttons are like, I'm gonna live boundarylessly and just shove anything in my mouth that I feel like doing. And that also will kill you. And it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's like, is it a sin to eat bacon, Shane? Well, that's a dumb question. Is it a sin to eat bacon? Probably not. But if you eat bacon every day, you will die, right? It's like, can I still go to heaven if I eat bacon? Yes, quickly, right? So it just depends how fast you wanna get there, right? So there's anorexics, you don't wanna be that. You don't wanna be gluttons. And then there's bulimics who they binge and then feel bad and purge. And sexuality mirrors that. There are people who like to pretend that they're not sexual at all. And there's a small percentage of people that aren't. Like asexuals, they really aren't interested. But in general, that's just ignoring a basic awareness of disconnection and a need for connection, and that's not helpful. Being a sexual angel or an anorexic and pretending like, oh, I don't have any, like that doesn't help. But sexual gluttony, like it's a free-for-all, man. That'll destroy us as well. And binging and purging our sexuality from guilt, that's not good either. And so what's a better object? Let's say it this way. Here's 4 better questions. Does my behavior, if continued on into perpetuity, does it honor the image bearer or does it objectify a person? That's one question. Second question, does my behavior, if continued into perpetuity, does it honor unity or division? Does it actually connect or does it disconnect? Does my behavior, if continued on, does it go to greater order or disorder? Does my behavior, if continued on, does it go on to chaos or new creation? Which one? Those are far, far more profound questions than, is it right or wrong? Can I still go to heaven? Like these are things that make us think about the nature of what it means to be a human being and how I'm treating someone else. See, let's say it this way. Most sexual problems result in one or both not knowing who they are without their partner. I'll say it this way, next one. Knowing who you are without them is actually your greatest gift to them. Your greatest gift to them is not your virginity. Your greatest gift to them is knowing who you are without them. And here's the reason why. Next slide. In this, they are not needed. Rather, they're wanted. When you know who you are without them, you can give your spouse the gift of not needing them, but something far more desirable than being needed is actually being wanted. And being needed plays well on Hollywood, but not in life. Actually, to be fair, being needed plays well in the first stages of attraction. The first stage of attraction is called limerence. Limerence is the involuntary rush of dopamine in your brain when you're in the presence of someone. It makes you addicted to them. This is why early on in your relationship, you could talk for 4 hours on the phone. It felt like 10 minutes. You're like, how's it going with Jim? It's awesome. Jim and I are doing amazing. What happened? The other night, we got in a phone call. It's 4.5 hours. I got to tell you, it felt like 10 minutes. That's the first level of attraction. And it's necessary or the world would stop existing. But honestly, if you've been married 20 years, a 4-hour chat sounds like hell. So we're gonna have a 4-hour chat. Oh my God, what's wrong? Right? So being needed sounds awesome in the first level of attraction. But being needed in a covenant relationship is burdensome. No one can carry the weight of being needed other than God. But your partner needs the gift of being wanted. And the only way you can give them the gift of being wanted instead of feeling the burden of being needed is knowing who you are without them. Let's say it this way. Next slide. Sex at its worst is driven by genitality. This moves towards objectification due to loneliness, insecurity, whatever the reason might be. This can happen in marriage as well. It's not like marriage is the solution that automatically fixes it. Too often the message is that marriage automatically fixes it. It does not. If you don't handle your identity stuff before you get married, you're just gonna take that into a covenant marriage. And yeah, it's just you and the person. And yeah, you're married and yeah, the church accepts it. But that doesn't mean you're giving your partner the gift of wanting them instead of needing them to fill all your holes. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that you're not needing them to fill all the places you feel lack and pain. And instead of looking to God for that, it's like, oh, wait a minute, I need my partner to do that. And the person can't handle it. And then we get frustrated. We're like, you used to love it when we were dating. And it's like, yeah, but man, we got to move past that. I can't be all that for you. I need you to want me, but I don't need you to need me. This pulls our partners into our pain, trying to alleviate it when it's not their role. Sex at its best is driven by selfless exploration or sexuality. Both people are channeling eros for the other's good and God's purposes. So there's 6 tensions, and I think there's 3 narratives, and it's our choice which narrative our sexuality will live out of. The first one, there's 3 dominant ones. There's more than 3, but one is erotic play. The goal, next slide. One is erotic play. Now, the goal of erotic play is just fulfillment of lust. It's hookup culture just for sexual release. It's Woodstock on speed. It's what evidently the people born in the 40s loved until that didn't do it either. And then they got married at 19 and settled down, and it was the right thing to do. It promises, but it doesn't deliver. This is why the most overtly erotic places are decidedly the least sexual by tonight's definition. Here's why. If you go to Amsterdam, right? And there's a section of Amsterdam called the Red Light District. And it's evidently, it's women in, like windows. And they advertise themselves. And I've spoken in Amsterdam many times. And those streets are, it's not like, the people in Amsterdam don't see it as dirty. Like, the pastor took me into that section. The pastor I was speaking for took me in there just so I could see. And then I'm talking, there's children walking around. It's like totally normalized. And then the streets are based on like the menu of your order. So there's like a thin street and like a medium build street, and then like, a more plump street. And then there's there's like Scandinavian white street, and then like sort of like, creamy colored street. And then there's like darker street. So you're basically, you're taking objectification as like, it's almost like it's a menu at a Chinese restaurant. I'll have a number 3 with a number 6. And it's like that. And it is incredibly erotic. Incredible. You got women just dancing. They're basically in bikinis, and they're dancing, and it's incredibly erotic, but it's incredibly one of the least sexual places you can imagine. The reason is let's say somebody goes in there and gives them whatever it costs to do that, €100 or whatever, and so you engage in whatever for 10 minutes for €100, and then you leave. Are you more aware of your connection with that person, or you're fundamentally more aware of how disconnected you are? This is why the most erotic places are decidedly the least sexual, because the most erotic places, when finished, actually lead us to being more aware of disconnection, not connection. Same with porn. Somebody engages with porn on the computer screen, and when that activity is over, you're not more aware of how connected you are to the people around you. You're actually more aware of how disconnected you are and how secretive you have to be, which is fundamentally less sexual and more erotic. Erotic and sexual are not the same thing. See, this is based on the genitality model. I don't know who I am, so I'll draw you into my discovery and disconnection. It's actually based on ancient Gnosticism, that you could separate your body from your spirituality. And it leads to objectifying an image bearer, and that's really the problem. This story fears rejection above all because the biggest problem underneath the thing is not sexual release, it's actually a fundamental awareness of disconnection, and that's not being met. And so it becomes a real problem. The problem with erotic play is where goes your body with food, sex, and power, there goes your soul. Because you can't separate objectifying this from that. Ultimately, erotic play leads to dehumanizing all people. Like, what if we told the Holocaust survivor it was just your body? It's like, no, there was a dehumanization there. See, casual sex is anything but casual sex because you are not casual. I'll say it another way. Casual sex is anything but casual because you're anything but casual. It's a narrative that promises connection but always delivers disconnection, which leads to a neurosis and this feeling of despair. That's erotic play. The second narrative is intimate connection. Intimate connection is a better narrative than erotic play for sure. The goal is to express a feeling and connection with someone you truly love. So you truly love the person, you're connected to them, you're committed to them. The freedom of expression with consent. So there's always consent. You're not wondering if there's with no fear of shaming. There's something in psychology called the freedom of response, right? So both people have a freedom of response in this story. Both people can say no. Both people can express their will or their desire without fear of these ultimatums. So this is intimate connection, which is infinitely a better narrative than erotic play. There's so much good to the intimate connection narrative. The question though is it the best story? It's a better story than erotic play. And this is where, like, if you're here, New Hope always honors people's journey. So if your sexuality has been being expressed in the erotic play narrative and you're like, you know what, you're right, that actually isn't delivering what I thought. I want to move. I want to move to the. I don't really get the whole marriage thing. I don't really get the whole the covenant stuff. I don't really get all that, but I definitely want to move into the intimate sort of connection narrative because the erotic play, like, if that's your next move, please make it. We would honor that next step in your journey. But the third narrative is something that, if you could think of a better word for it, I'll listen. It's something we'll call covenant promise. It's a covenant promise narrative. And it does not guarantee a healthy sexuality because there's so many variables. Like if somebody goes into a covenant promise and yet they haven't worked out who they are and so they're needing the person instead of wanting them, it's still gonna be some problems. We gotta work that out. But that was the lie that left people disillusioned. The ketubah promise, which a ketubah is a Hebrew word for a covenant promise, was built in accountability that led to safety and trust. I think it was Father Richard Rohr said it this way. Next slide. Next one. What if a covenant promise is the only construct powerful enough to harness the power of someone's sexuality? Like I get asked this all the time. Like people. And let me just acknowledge a few things that are obvious, and it's intellectually disingenuous not to acknowledge them. Somebody asked me once, well, I was told the Bible forbids premarital sex. Okay, kind of. But in the Bible, there was no such thing as premarital sex. It was, if you had sex, you were married. And so the forbiddance of premarital sex was a forbiddance of prepubescent sex because how marriage worked was you had your first period and within 4 weeks you were married. So it was actually bigger than that. And people have worked this out and they're like, well, they got married at 13, we're getting married at 30, do the same rules apply? And to your credit, it is intellectually disingenuous to talk about matters of sex in the same language with a 13-year-old as with a 35-year-old or a 50-year-old. It's obviously needs some different narratives and different framings. And so the issue is people say, well, you know, I'm 35, like why wait? Well, here's the problem, right? If you introduce sex too early in a relationship, it releases an enzyme in your brain that will blind you to the character flaws that will drive you insane later. Let me say it another way. I'm not sure that landed. You're like, oh, okay, I don't know. All right. Everybody know what Novocaine is? Novocaine is the numbing agent dentists give you before they drill into your teeth. It makes you numb. It's a medical device. Sex is Novocaine. In some cases, early on in your marriage, sex is the Novocaine that makes them tolerable. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. You're like, oh, I don't know. Yes, you do. Both men and women both, in the first 7 years of marriage, get to a point where there's a day where you're driving each other nuts, and instead of working it out, you just out-sex what's bothering you. You're like, I'm not mad at you anymore. Okay. Because sex is Novocaine that is very, very good. Here's the problem. If you introduce sex too early, the Novocaine will blind you to the obvious character flaws that will drive you insane later. This is why the biggest clump of divorces is at 7 years and 23 years. 23 years for a different reason. The biggest clump of divorce at 7 years is for this reason. Because 7 years into a marriage, you can't out-sex what bothers you. It's just not that impressive anymore. And this is how that narrative sounds. They end up in my office. The guy's like, Shane, this is not the woman I married. I'm like, yeah, no, unfortunately she is. She was kind of mean, critical, jealous, cantankerous. She couldn't cook, you know. Was kind of untrustworthy, you know. Handled conflict terribly, you know. But you had plenty of Novocaine. You're like, whatever, we'll eat out, right? Or they're like, Shane, this is not the man I married. No, it is. It is. He's gross, you know. Doesn't bathe often enough. You know, a little bit of a slob. Doesn't pick up after himself. But when you were dating, it was like, oh, well, we had plenty of Novocaine. I'll pick up after him. And now the character flaw that's driving you nuts, the reason you couldn't see it early was you introduced sex too early. When you introduce sex too early, it blinds you to the obvious character flaws that will drive you insane later. Now, good sermons aren't meant to be agreed with or disagreed with. They're meant to be wrestled with. I've not said more than I did say, just for time constraints. You don't want this to go much longer. And so if you'd like a fuller discussion of this, like I said, Grace City Church, Albany, Georgia, if you just YouTube search Grace City Church, Shane Willard, Sexuality. There's a 2-hour version. There's also an 11-session follow-up on my table. But just for tonight, let's end this with some questions. What if sex is a vital part of our character formation, not just something we do physically? Number 2, what if sex is actually our teacher? What if it's teaching us something about preferring the other person? Number 3, which narrative are we living out of? Not out loud, just in yourself. Am I currently in the erotic play narrative? Am I in the intimate connection narrative? Or am I in the covenant promise narrative? And can I make a choice to move to a better narrative? Number 4, do we know who we are without them? Or number 5, are we using them to define us? Healthy people don't need them or their sexuality to define their identity. Their identity is something else. At the most base level, human being. Labels are for products, love is for people. As soon as you can label someone not human, even at the most base level, that's the level you can mistreat them. Number 6, are we in a situation where we can offer ourselves? I'm 48, I can barely read that without glasses. Are we in a situation where we can offer ourselves as a gift and not feel used for offering ourselves as a gift? It's an important way to know whether you're in a healthy situation. Number 7, longings are redemptive. Complaints are divisive. Can we offer our longings instead of our complaints? It's a far more healthy language to tell your partner, I want you to do this. I just really desire it. Hey, can we have another conversation? I just really desire it, versus complaining about what they don't do. Express it as a desire for your authentic need. And authentic needs are there. And it's okay for your partner to have a need you don't have. Men in general have a higher need for sex than women. And that's not wrong. It's actually largely based in physiology and how the half-life of a sperm cell is only about 3 days old. And so if you get too long without some sort of sexual release, your brain thinks you're not gonna be able to procreate, and it starts telling your body, ah! That's why if you ever see your good-hearted husband walking in circles and doing push-ups when he doesn't normally do it, just kind of think, when was the last time? It's that. Number 8, I think this is the ultimate question. Can we trust God with our body? Or have we bought into the lie that my spirituality and my body are just two separate things? So, Lord, would you give us the courage to see things different, the irresistible urge to respond to what we see? And would you give us the grace to journey with ourselves, with our spouses, and with each other, with grace and kindness, honoring everyone's journey. And give us the courage to choose the best narrative. Amen. Thank you so much for being a part of your night. I'd like to invite you again back tomorrow night. It's only an hour long, and we'll have an incredible discussion and see where that organic discussion goes. I've enjoyed being a part of your day today. I hope Jesus got bigger, the cross worked better, the resurrection is central, and scriptures got bigger, not smaller. Thank you so much for letting me talk on this topic tonight. And thank you for your graciousness towards me as I was doing it. And thank you, Jace, on the back row, for laughing as hard as you did at my jokes. I appreciate it, bro. You made me feel like Chris Rock up here. Thank you. Grace and peace, everybody.